The moment you try to control everything is the moment your mind loses control. There is a small, almost forgotten story tucked away in Japan's history. In a secluded mountain dojo, an old sword master asked his student a simple question. Teeshi, if you faced 10 enemies at once, how many could you kill? The young samurai answered confidently, all 10, master. The master shook his head. You would kill none, because the moment you think about 10 people, you've already lost to the first. It sounds like an old riddle from feudal Japan. But look closer, and it becomes the tragedy of millions of people living today. You're also fighting 10 enemies at once. Work, money, health, relations, family expectations, the pressure to succeed, the fear of failing, loneliness, comparison, and that relentless inner critic. And just like the young samurai, you're losing not because you're weak, but because your mind is everywhere except here. Back then, samurai carried swords into battle. Today, you carry a phone, sit facing screens, and fight invisible wars. Deadlines, notifications, messages, emails, social media. Your brain is always in combat mode, yet never truly present with the moment, the person in front of you, or yourself. Samurai understood something most people have forgotten. Real victory doesn't come from technique. It comes from the state of your mind, not from the sword in your hand, but from the stillness within you. Some warriors possessed flawless technique, but they died on the battlefield for one simple reason. They thought too much about fame, about winning, about failing, about how others saw them. They fought 10 enemies in their heads before facing the one standing right in front of them. And that is exactly what happens to us. You're working but thinking about unread messages. You're talking to someone you love, but your mind is drowning in finances, fear, and the future. You're eating, but thoughts are trapped in arguments, regrets, and expectations. You're not losing because you're not good enough. You're losing because your mind has left the present moment. The story you're about to hear, Teeshi's journey, reveals an ancient principle so powerful the Japanese once considered it a forbidden mind control technique. A technique not for controlling others, not for manipulating the world, but for mastering one thing. Where your mind is in each moment. When you understand it, you realize you don't need to fight 10 battles at once. You don't need to predict every worst-case scenario. You only need to control one thing, your presence. Our story begins with a 11-year-old samurai trainee, technically flawless, yet paralyzed by fear. In every sparring match, upper echoed in his mind. What if I lose? What if the master sees my weakness? What if they think I'm not good enough? Do you recognize yourself in those questions? It's no different when you try to change your life, start something new, take a risk, or simply live differently. Before you act, your mind floods you with every possible disaster. And in the end, your feet freeze, your hands stop, your life stalls. Life philosophy doesn't exist to tell you, be brave, everything will be okay. This channel exists to go deeper. Why does your mind paralyze you exactly when you need to move? How did ancient Japanese warriors face death calmly while our hearts race at simple decisions? And most importantly, how can you apply their principle to modern life so your emotions stop controlling you? In this video, you'll journey back to feudal Japan, into the mountain dojo. You sit beside Teeshi through silent nights of meditation and witness how a fearful young warrior learned to face 5 swordsmen with nothing but presence. But this is not a fairy tale. It is a manual for the mind, hidden in the language of swordsmanship. Your job is to listen as if your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. If you're tired of fighting everything at once, if every night feels like a battlefield inside your head, this video is for you, not to help you escape life, but to help you enter it with a mind that no longer shatters under pressure. If you want to explore ancient principles that make modern people stronger, calmer, and clearer, then subscribe to Life Philosophy, turn on notifications, and after watching, comment below. What is the enemy you've been fighting inside your own mind? This isn't just a video. It's your first step toward a new way of living. Not through fear, but through presence. Now let's begin Teeshi's story. Part Mote, the samurai who because his mind was chaotic. Teeshi entered the dojo at the age of 12, a thin, quiet boy whose eyes carried a fierce desire to become a samurai. 5 years passed. He grew up with the sound of wooden swords clashing, with the scent of polished floors, and with long winter nights spent meditating until his legs went numb. His technique was flawless, clean, precise. Anyone who watched him would think that boy was born to be a samurai. But there was something no one could see from the outside. Inside Teeshi was a heart constantly trembling. During sparring sessions, the same thoughts always: if I lose? What if I get hit? What if the master sees my weakness? Whenever he raised his sword, his hands shook slightly. Whenever an opponent charged, his reflexes slowed, just by one beat. But one beat is enough to lose. Whispers began circulating in the dojo. Teeshi has good technique but no warrior spirit. He thinks too much, no way he can pass the final test. And they were right. The final test was the rite of passage separating a trainee from a true samurai. A real duel with the master, using a real blade. A test of presence, calm, and inner discipline. Most students took it at 18, but Teeshi was already 17 and a half, and the master hadn't said a word about it. The closer the deadline came, the tighter anxiety wrapped around his mind. One evening after training, Teeshi knelt before his master. The old man was in seiza meditating, breath steady, posture unmoving like a stone statue carved into the floor. Teeshi waited some minutes. Then only then did the master open his eyes, slowly, sharply, as if he could see straight through the boy's soul. Master Teeshi's voice trembled. When will I be allowed to take the final test? The master studied him. Those eyes had witnessed 100 battles and trained 1,000 students. And right now, they were seeing something Teeshi didn't want anyone to see. Fear in terms of technique. The master said you are ready. But being technically ready means nothing. You don't understand, master. Stand up. Takeshi obeyed and gripped his bakken. When I say so, strike me. The master remained kneeling. No weapon, no guard. The perfect opening. Teeshi raised his sword, but his body refused to follow through. His wrist locked. He wanted to strike. You do not dare, the master said. Is it not because I respect you, master? Teeshi asked weakly. The master shook his head, his voice sharp as steel. You lie to yourself. Afraid of what happens after the strike. Afraid of my reaction at a failing. Afraid of being judged. Your mind is in 10 different places and none of them is the one that matters. Here, in this moment, those words struck harder than any wooden sword ever could. The master stood. Until you learn to be in this moment, you will never be a samurai. You are a warrior in technique but a coward in mind. That night, Teeshi couldn't sleep. He stared at the pale moonlight shining through the tiny window of his room and felt a burning shame in his chest. 5 years of training. 5 years of discipline, sacrifice, and pain. And yet, because his mind constantly fled the present, he still couldn't cross the threshold into true warriorhood. He repeated the master's words. Your mind is in 10 places. For the first time, he understood the truth. The problem wasn't his speed, not his technique. The problem was the one thing he had never truly learned to control. His own mind. This realization marked the turning point of his life, and perhaps of anyone living today. We don't fail because we're not capable. We fail because our mind wanders into fear, into the future, into the harsh voices inside our head, pulling us away from the only place real strength exists, the present moment. And that is where Teeshi's journey truly began, the same journey we were about to walk together. Part Shoshin, the mind of a beginner. The next morning, when Teeshi was still drowning in the heavy feeling of last night's failure, Master Yamamoto stepped into the dojo and said something that made every student freeze. Today, no sword practice. Today we clean. No one dared to sigh, but inside everyone was disappointed. To the students sweeping the floor, wiping weapons, arranging the shrine, none of that felt like training. It was just chores, boring, a waste of time. Teeshi thought the same. He pushed the broom back and forth across the wooden floor, but his mind was not there. In his head, only one thought kept looping. I need more sword practice. I need better technique. I need to prepare for the final test. The more he swept, the more frustrated he became. The more frustrated he became, the more carelessly he moved the broom, as if he just wanted to finish this meaningless task and move on to something important. Then suddenly, in the middle of his irritation, Teeshi looked up and saw his master. Master Yamamoto was also sweeping the floor, but the way he swept made Teeshi stop in his tracks. No rush, no annoyance, no sense of I should be doing something better. Each motion of the broom, pushing left, pulling right, was complete, steady, and quiet. There was no person sweeping there. There was only the act of sweeping happening fully. It wasn't labor. It was moving meditation. For the first time in his life, Teeshi saw what presence looked like in the most ordinary task. And it confused him. After the cleaning was done, the master called him over. Teeshi, what did you learn today? He lowered his head, hesitant. He learned that the dojo must be kept clean. The master chuckled, a gentle but deeply knowing laugh. No. You still haven't seen anything. He led Teeshi into a small room behind the dojo, a meditation hall. On the wall hung a large calligraphy scroll with 2 characters, Shoshin, beginner's mind. The master asked, do you know what this means? It means keeping the attitude of a beginner. Teeshi guessed. Correct, but incomplete. When a beginner picks up a sword for the first time, what is in his mind? Teeshi thought for a moment. Curiosity, the desire to learn, to understand. The master nodded. And what else? Teeshi was silent for a few seconds and answered, "Nothing else. Just the sword in his hands." "Exactly." The master's eyes lit up. "Shoshin is a mind that holds nothing except what is happening right now. No expectation, no fear, no past, future, only this moment, this action." He looked straight into Teeshi. "You swept the floor with your mind on the test. You practiced your sword with your mind on the fear of failing. You live, but your mind has never truly been present in the moment you're living." Those words made Teeshi bow his head. He felt a painful kind of shame. He had never been fully present in anything. The master placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke slowly. "You think the sword is the weapon of a samurai. But it's not. The real weapon is a present mind, not just zanshin. Awareness after the striking, no mind during battle. Not just fudoshin, an unmoving mind in the face of danger. All of those grow from one root. Shoshin, the beginner's mind, empty enough to truly see, untwisted by fear and expectation." Teeshi looks at her. "How do I train this mind?" The master replied, "Starting tomorrow, every single thing you do must be done with full attention. Just eat when you walk. Just walk when you hold the sword. There is only the sword. Do not let your mind wander even one step away." "How long until I understand it, master?" "It could be a month. It could be a year. It could be a lifetime. That depends on one thing, whether you truly want to see yourself." That night, Teeshi sat in meditation. For the first time, he didn't try to achieve anything. He just sat, just instinct. Am I doing this right? Will I improve by tomorrow? What if I still fail? But this time he didn't chase them, let them come and go, like clouds passing through the sky, and in one brief moment, maybe only a few seconds, he felt a kind of stillness he had never touched in his 17 years of life. That moment was the first seed of Shoshin. Part Ba. The first week of Shoshin, when presence becomes the real challenge. The first 3 days passed nothing like what Teeshi had imagined. He thought training presence meant doing something grand. Hours of meditation, intense focus, or reaching some lightened state. But reality was far harsher. Presence is hardest in the simplest moments. On the very first morning, when he picked up his chopstick, just eat. Don't think. But the moment he took his first bite of rice, his mind shot off. Is my technique improving? When will the final test happen? What if I fail? One bite of rice and the mind was already 3 places ahead. When he walked out to practice footwork, the master said, "Just walk, think." Yet every step felt heavy. I must train harder today. Am I improving fast enough? Is the master watching? When he picked up his wooden sword, the master said, "Lift the blade." Don't think, but the smell of the bokken triggered a flood of thoughts. What if I make a mistake? What if they see my weakness? What if I embarrass myself again? At that moment, Teeshi finally understood his teacher's earlier words. You live, but your mind has never lived with you. On the 4th day after training, Teeshi sat on the wooden porch of the dojo, looking at the mist-covered mountains in the distance. A quiet sense of failure washed over him. He had tried so hard to be present, yet his mind kept running like a wild horse. The more he pulled, the faster it escaped. As he sat there in frustration, Master Yamamoto approached, holding a cup of hot tea. He placed the cup in front of Teeshi and asked, "What do you see?" Teeshi answered, "Cup of tea, master." "No," the master said. "You only know it is tea. You haven't seen it yet." He lifted the cup closer to Teeshi's face. "Do you see the steam rising? Do you see the sunlight on the surface?" "Yes, sir." "Do you smell the leaves?" "Yes." The master set the cup down. "Now you are beginning to see." Teeshi looked confused. "Mean, master?" The master replied, "When the mind clings to the past or chases the future, the eyes cannot see, the ears cannot hear, and the hands cannot feel what is actually here. But just now you looked, you smell, felt. You were here." A profound lesson delivered through a single cup of tea. Then the master said the sentence that Teeshi would remember for the rest of his life. Presence is not for battle. Presence is for living your life, moment by moment. That night during meditation, Teeshi chose not to force his mind to be still. Instead, he asked himself a simple question. Is this moment actually as bad as he realized? No. This moment, his breathing, the sound of insects outside, the quiet of the night, was peaceful. It was his thoughts about the future that suffocated him, not the present itself. On the 6th day, while practicing footwork, for the first time he truly felt his feet touching the ground. The soft thud, the breeze over the grass, the breath moving with each step. No voices inside his head, no comparisons, no fear. Just one Teeshi simply walking. That evening, as the master passed through the courtyard, he took one glance and smiled gently. That is the one who holds the sword. A single sentence. Yet enough for Teeshi to understand. Presence isn't about trying. It's about returning to every step, every sensation, every moment. And so the first week of Shoshin came to an end. Not with victory, achievement, or new techniques, but with a quiet change deep within. His mind had finally begun to stay, and this was only the beginning. Part Born. Bami Days to Rewire the Brain. The next Bami days of Teeshi's training were unlike anything he had ever experienced. There were no intense sword drills, no spectacular sparring sessions, no shouts of discipline echoing through the dojo. Instead, they were Bami days of turning inward, Bami days Yamamoto-sensei called the rewiring period. It sounded simple, but it became the greatest challenge of Teeshi's life. During those Bami days, his only opponent wasn't another warrior, it was his own mind, Days Mulfei. The mind's rebellion. On the very first day, Teeshi realized why presence was something Rai spent their entire lives pursuing. Every time he lifted a bowl of rice, his mind instantly scattered. My test is coming soon. How long will we train today? Is the master watching me? What if I fail again? One bowl of rice and the mind had already created 1,000 imaginary futures. When practicing footwork, he lasted barely 10 seconds before leaping into worry. I have to be perfect. I need to show improvement. I can't fall behind. Sensei just stood beside him, silent, but with eyes sharp as steel. A gaze that didn't accuse, yet revealed everything. You're being dragged by your mind without even knowing it. That first week, Teeshi realized a painful truth. He had never lived a single moment fully. Days Tamfei Milanks in the noise. By the second week, something began to shift, not in his surroundings but within him. One morning, during meditation, he experienced something unexpected. His mind went silent. Not because he forced it, not because he concentrated intensely, but because, just for a brief moment, silence arose on its own. For 3 seconds, the constant chatter vanished. He heard the wind brushing the dojo wall. He felt the pulse in his palm. And for the first time in his life, he realized, I am actually here. Just 3 seconds, they opened a vast gate inside him. After that moment, the mental noise returned, louder than before. But now Teeshi knew something important. Silence exists, and it sits right beneath the noise. From that day forward, he changed how he trained. When sweeping, he felt each stroke. When eating, he tasted each grain of rice. When walking, each step became a meditation. When holding his sword, he felt its weight and texture. He no longer moved to finish the task. He no longer trained to progress faster. He did everything to be with the moment itself. Days Muisao Hamiba. The body begins to change. By the third week, presence wasn't just in his thoughts. It began to reshape his body. During a sparring match with Kenji, who previously outpaced him, Teeshi experienced what he later called the body knows before the mind. Kenji launched a fast downward strike, one Teeshi had seen many times. But this time, he didn't think. He didn't calculate. His body moved by itself. His feet slid, his arms lifted the wooden sword, and he smoothed, effortless. Kenji stepped back, stunned. You weren't thinking, he said, but you were faster. Much. She stayed silent. Yet inside, something trembled. This was what the old masters meant when they said, when the mind is still, the body becomes right. Presence didn't make his technique prettier. It made excess. No hesitation, no forcing. Only the action that needed to happen. Days Haimatu. Bamui. Presence becomes inks. The final week felt unfamiliar. He no longer tried to be present. It began to happen naturally, as if his brain was being rewritten. Everything became slower, yet more precise, softer, yet more powerful, less thought-driven, yet more aware. One afternoon, Sensei called him into the courtyard. Begin, he said. No explanations. For the first time, Teeshi didn't need them. He watched, he listened, he sensed, and he understood what he was meant to do. Later, Sensei asked, how do you feel? Teeshi answered, I no longer try to keep my mind still, master. It simply becomes still. Sensei nodded. That is when you stop controlling the mind and begin living with it. The result of Bami days. On the Bamite Hat Day, Teeshi walked down the stone path behind the dojo as the sun rose. He looked up at the sky and realized nothing outside had changed, yet everything inside him was different. He was less reactive, less anxious, less distracted, less trapped by thought, and he was more aware, more grounded, more present, more powerful in a quiet, invisible way. This power didn't come from skills, not from confidence. It came from being fully here, moment by moment. Teeshi had crossed a threshold, and he would never return to the way he was before. Part Num. The Science of Samurai Mind Control. After Bami days of mental rewiring, Yamamoto Sensei decided it was time for Teeshi to understand presence not just through intuition, but through the science behind it. The mechanisms that ancient samurai had mastered centuries before modern neuroscience caught up. One quiet afternoon, as the wind had a mountain brushed through the dojo courtyard, the master said, a samurai doesn't just control the sword, he controls the brain that wields the sword. Then he began explaining truths the samurai already understood born years ago. Truth's science has only recently proven dumb. The wandering brain that defeats warrior Sensei picked up a dry bamboo stick and drew 2 circles on the ground. This is the ordinary human mind, he said, tapping the larger circle. It thinks about the past, worries about the future, compares, imagines, panics. In our tradition, we call it the restless mind. In Western science, it's called the default mode network. Teeshi repeated softly. Done, yes. The dem is what pulls you away from the present, what fills you with fear, what makes you think about 10 enemies at once. When the dem is active, you are no longer here. And a warrior who is not here is already dead. Teeshi remembered his former self, anxious, calculating, imagining disasters, trying to predict every strike. All of that was the dem in control. When you practice presence, Sensei continued, you turn the dem off. And when the gem shuts down, you see hear clearly and react precisely. Only then do you become a true warrior, the prefrontal cortex. The center of focus and emotional control. Sensei pointed to the smaller circle. This is the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that directs attention, regulates emotion, and chooses action. When you practice presence, when you return to your breath, your steps, your sword, you strengthen this area like a muscle. Sensei placed the bamboo stick on Teeshi's palm. Hold this. Get held it. Sensei tapped it lightly. If your mind is weak, emotion will shake this branch. If your prefrontal cortex is strong, even storms cannot move it. It presence wasn't mystic, neurotions, simple, powerful, measurable. Flow state was mushin, where east and west meet. Sensei looked toward the distant mountains, as if recalling battles long past. The west calls it flow, the state where you act without thinking, respond without hesitation, create without effort. He touched his chest. We call mind of no mind. Mushin does not mean having no thoughts. It means thoughts cannot control you. Flow state and mushin share 3 identical qualities. Time slows down, the body moves before the mind thinks, fear dissolves, but the samurai went beyond flow. They turned mushin into an entire way of living, not only in battle, but in every step, every meal, every breath. Musashi Taekwondo Soho. Wisdom beyond centuries. Sensei led Teeshi into the small wooden library beside the dojo, where 2 carved tablets hung on the wall. The first bore a quote from Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest swordsman in Japanese history. In strategy, it is important to see distant things as if they were close and to take a distant view of close things. Teeshi read slowly. To see the far as if it were near, and to see the near as if it were far. Sensei nodded. That is presence. That is the mind untainted by fear or expectation. That is the dem turned off. The second tablet carried the words of Zen master Taekwondo Soho, mentor to many samurai. The mind must always be in a state of flowing. When it stops anywhere, the flow is interrupted. When the mind stops, it becomes trapped. Trapped in fear outcome. Trapped in pride. And that is the moment a warrior loses the immovable mind. Fuchin. Finally, the master spoke of the deepest concept. The immovable mind, the mind that cannot be shaken. But immovable does not mean emotionless. It does not mean hardened or numb. It means emotions come, but do not topple you. Fear appears, but does not guide your actions. Danger is present, but clarity remains. Chaos rises, but you do not lose yourself. See, placed a hand on Teeshi's shoulder. Fuchin is not becoming a stone. It is becoming a mountain. Wind breaks trees, but wind can never break the mountain. The warrior's mind must be the same. Understanding leads to mastery. When the lesson ended, Teeshi walked across the dojo courtyard feeling lighter. He realized, a samurai is not the strongest. A samurai is not the fastest. A samurai is not even the most skilled. A samurai is the most aware. Awareness is the root of every invisible strength. And now, Teeshi finally understood the science behind the ancient art he was living. The real blade test. The hiss of the katana sliced through the air. Steel, wind, and silence collided in a single heartbeat. Teeshi didn't predict, didn't analyze, he simply existed. Fully present, fully aware, fully alive in this exact moment. For weeks, Sensei had tested him with wooden swords, bamboo sticks, and controlled drills. But today the blade was real. A real edge, a real risk, a real chance to fail, or to awaken. Sensei stepped forward with the calmness of a man who had walked through death many times and returned unscathed. Then he unleashed his strike, not fast, slow, but at a rhythm meant to reveal the truth. Was Teeshi truly present, or merely rehearsing presence? The katana whistled again. Teeshi's eyes did not chase the sword. His mind did not jump into fear. He felt the pressure in the air before the blade arrived. He sensed the shift in Sensei's footwork. He moved not to block, but to flow. The strike passed beside his cheek, close enough for him to feel the cold breath of steel. He did not flinch. Sensei nodded, but the true test hadn't begun yet. The master suddenly shifted into an opening. a gap in his stance, an obvious weakness like a door left carelessly ajar. A perfect opportune trap. Teeshi saw it, felt it, but he didn't move. He recognized the deception. Samurai called it the false gap, a deliberate flaw meant to provoke ego, impatience, and the illusion of victory. Most warriors strike immediately, and most warriors lose immediately. Teeshi exhaled softly, lowering his center of gravity, keeping his awareness wide and fluid. Sensei smiled. Teeshi had not fallen for the trap. The master sheathed his sword and said quietly, "Remember this. Some victories are nothing more than failures wearing a mask." The opening Sensei created was not a gif, it was bait. Had Teeshi lunged forward, he would have walked straight into a counter-strike. Swift, final, unavoidable. A win that destroys you is not a win. A chance that blinds you is not a blessing. A flaw that appears too easy is never real. Teeshi bowed deeply, understanding the lesson. Presence protects you from illusions. Ego leads you straight into them. The dojo returned to silence. But inside Teeshi, something profound had awakened. Not skill, not technique, but a deeper intuition. True strength is knowing when not to strike. Upon year on Mount Koya, forging a pure and quiet mind, no sword, no combat, no battles testing the line between life and death. Only mountains, wind, temple bells, and endless days of silence. Teeshi was sent to Mount Koya, a place where monks, lost samurai, and wanderers searching for their true path had stopped for centuries. A place where time slowed down, the soul softened, and the mind had nowhere to hide from itself. Each morning he swept the temple grounds. At noon he worked in the kitchen. In the afternoon he chopped wood, carried water, tended the garden. At night he sat on the wooden veranda, listening to insects humming in the cold mountain air. No one taught him swordsmanship. No one asked him to train harder. No one told him to be strong. There was only one lesson: forge a pure, quiet mind. And that, ironically, was the hardest training of all. A mind like a wild horse. Even while washing dishes, his thoughts kept running wild. How I done enough? Why did Sensei send me here? When will I get to train again? Are the others surpassing me right now? His thoughts spun endlessly, like a chaotic stream crashing against the walls of his skull. And the more he tried to force them to stop, the louder they became. Month high. The breakthrough moment. One misty morning, while sitting in meditation, a thought struck him like a punch. I have to calm down. I must calm down right now. And suddenly, he laughed, a soft, brief, effortless laugh. But it was enough to unravel the tension in his chest. In that moment understood. The mind's thoughts cannot be stopped, but we don't have to follow them. The stream will keep flowing. That is its nature. But he didn't need to jump into the water and get swept away every time. He could simply stand on the riverbank and observe. No resistance, no pressure to control it, and no self-blame when the mind wandered. That morning became the breakthrough of his second month. Teeshi finally realized a truth that even lifelong warriors sometimes fail to grasp. For the sword to be sharp, the mind must first be clear. And for the mind to be clear, you must step outside your own thoughts. A year passing slowly, yet profoundly, life on Mount Koya taught him things no battlefield ever could. Strength that originate from muscle but from clarity. Peace isn't found by escaping storms but by not being swept away by them. Presence is the foundation of every art. Warrior, monk, or human, he became different, less fearful, less obsessed with results. The mountain didn't change him with thunder. It changed him with silence. And that silence made his mind firm like stone, soft like water, and light like clouds. There were no fights that year, yet it became the most important year in the life of a warrior. Part-time, facing 5 swordsmen, winning without fighting. One late winter afternoon, after leaving Mount Koya, Teeshi walked down the ancient path leading toward the village at the foot of the mountain. The sky was tinted with ash-gray light, the sun barely piercing through the cedar forest, and the air carried a heaviness, the kind of silence only someone who has truly trained their mind can hear. Then that silence was torn apart. 5 figures emerged from the slope ahead. 5 Ronin swordsmen, gray cloaks, masked faces, and blades glinting cold under the fading light. At the center stood their leader, Katsuru, a notorious Ronin known for arrogance and brutality, but also for the quiet wound hidden inside him. Once a samurai under a powerful lord, he lost everything after rebellion. Since then, he lived rootless, using fear to fill the void within. Katsuru stepped forward, voice laced with disdain. A man without a sword, a monk coming down the mountain, dares walk this path? Teeshi didn't answer. He simply stood there. Back stray eyes calm, breath steady as a morning lake, no challenge, fear. No defensiveness. His silence thickened the air around them. A Ronin beside Katsuru growled. "He's mocking us." He moved to draw his sword, but Katsuru raised a hand, stopping him. The leader stared into Teeshi's eyes, and what unsettled him was resistance, but the absence of it. Teeshi was like a mirror, and the hardest thing in the world is facing your own ego reflected back at you. Silence makes violence impossible. Katsuru stepped closer. Teeshi remained unmoving. No stance, no guard, no retreat. His pride, yet unwavering, caused the storm inside Katsuru to hesitate. All his life, Katsuru had relied on intimidation. He was used to people bowing, trembling, making excuses, backing away. But this time was different. Teeshi neither challenged nor feared him. He simply existed fully in this moment. And that stillness robbed violence of its fuel, like plunging a sword into a perfectly still lake. You do not find a foe, only your own reflection. Presence exposes the ego of the aggressor. The Ronin behind Katsuru began to shift uneasily. One whispered, "Why do I feel suffocated?" Not because Teeshi was powerful, but because they felt small standing before someone who didn't need to prove anything. Katsuru finally understood. When a person is no longer controlled by emotion, the most reactive one is always the first to be revealed. He looked at Teeshi for a long moment. Then the sword in his hand suddenly felt unnecessary. He lowered it. The remaining Ronin exchanged glances, then lowered their blades as well. Teeshi bowed slightly, not in submission, but as an act of respect for wounded souls standing before him. The distilled lesson of that confrontation: no blood spilled, no swords erupted. Yet a battle had taken place, and Teeshi won. By not fighting at all, because true presence has a quiet power. It forces people to see themselves, and when they see deeply enough, the desire to harm dissolves. Katsuru finally whispered, almost to himself, "I could defeat your silence." Teeshi offered a soft smile and walked past them, continuing on his path. With each step, the lesson crystallized. Presence transforms, not by force but by truth. 13 years later, Teeshi becomes a master. 10 years had passed since Teeshi left Mount Koya and began the long journey of becoming himself. Life led him through many villages, many dojos, and many nights facing challenges that didn't come from enemies outside, but from the shadows within. And yet through those 10 years, his mind matured the way an ancient forest grows. Quietly, steadily, without needing to announce anything. While others his age were still searching for direction, Teeshi had already earned a new title. The Master of Presence, not because he fought better than anyone else, not because he possessed extraordinary sword techniques, not because he never failed, but because in his eyes, in his posture, in his breath, people felt something only true masters carry. A mind that does not waver, a presence that fills the room without force. Whenever someone stood before him, they felt a strange transformation, as if his stillness made them more honest, less guarded, less controlled by their own ego. Passing down the teaching, Teeshi opened a small meditation hall beside a flowing stream, where morning mist rested on stone steps and the sound of water blended naturally with the wind like an ancient chant. People came from everywhere: warriors, scholars, mercs, lost souls, the wounded and the discouraged. They all assumed Teeshi would teach them swordsmanship, but he offered only one lesson: the sword is not the weapon. Presence is the ultimate weapon. He often told his students, a person who cannot master the moment will forever be enslaved by their own thoughts. But the one who masters even 3 seconds of true presence can master their entire life. Because when you are present, fear loses its grip, the past stops chaining you, the future stops threatening you, and every action emerges from clarity instead of chaos. Students often asked, "Master, how can we become strong like you?" Teeshi simply smiled. Strength does not come from defeating others. It comes from not defeating yourself. A master without the appearance of a legend. People expected a master to look imposing, to radiate authority, to walk like the earth trembled beneath him, but Teeshi was the opposite. He looked like a simple farmer, gentle like an old man fishing at the lake, steady like a candle that doesn't flicker in the wind, and that simplicity made people trust him even more. Because the deepest presence always comes from the simplest thing. The final lesson that crystallized 10 years made Teeshi a warrior. But 10 years also made him a human being who finally understood. The greatest weapon is not in your hands, but in the moment you are awake. Teeshi no longer wandered the world searching for strength. He became the person who planted strength gently into the hearts of others. A life like that, free from fame, free from legend, is worthy of being called a master. If this journey resonates with you, take one more step onto the path the samurai once walked, the path of unshakable presence.